Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's training on safety planning with unaccompanied refugee minors, minimizing further risk for exploitation and trafficking. This training is presented by Switchboard, a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. My name is Tigest Coleman, and I'm the Switchboard's training officer. I'm joined by a co-host today, Rebecca Milqueen, and you'll be hearing from Rebecca in the chat throughout today's training. I'd like to start by mentioning that today's training will run for 1 hour and 30 minutes and that it's being recorded. You'll be emailed a link to the recording in exactly 24 hours. We'll go ahead and dive right in with a few logistics in Zoom before turning it over to today's speaker. All attendees are currently muted and are joined in listen-only mode. If you're having any trouble, you can switch between phone and computer audio at any time. You'll find the audio settings in the bottom left corner of your screen. We welcome your comments and questions throughout today's session, and to do so, you can click the chat bubble icon in the bottom center of your screen to open the chat. Send your chat message to all panelists and attendees so we're all able to view your message. Of course, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of today's session, but we would also love to hear your questions throughout. You can type your questions by clicking on the Q&A button. If you see a submitted question that you would like to answered, feel free to upvote it by clicking the thumbs up next to that question. We've also received some really good questions from some of you during the pre-registration, which we'll also be addressing. I am thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Amy Fleischauer, Director for Survivor Support Services at International Institute of Buffalo. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It feels a little bit like I'm speaking into the void, but I am so excited to be with all of you today. I am a firm believer that there is much more expertise than certainly I can offer in this group. So in general, I really like to be laid back and collaborative when I'm doing presenting, and I really look forward to your participation as we walk through the material today. So my name is Amy Fleischauer. I am indeed the Director of Survivor Support Services at the International Institute of Buffalo in New York. And we are actually primarily a refugee resettlement organization. I was hired in 2006 to begin doing some more formal survivor response. And at that point, it was just me, and we are now a department of almost 20 individuals. I oversee 2 departments. One focuses solely on foreign national survivors of domestic violence. And then more pertinent to our discussions today, I actually initiated and continue to oversee the human trafficking response in Western New York. The field has come a long way. I've only been in this field since 2006, and I'm considered an expert because it's so new. So I like to think that my expertise comes from a lot of mistakes that I've made along the way. In 2006, there were really only about 20 of us in the entire country that were doing anti-trafficking work. It's now obviously a much larger field. We do at the International Institute, we do a lot of specialized programming in human trafficking. We have a specialized housing program. We're on site within 2 human trafficking intervention courts. I co-facilitate our task force, which many of you may be part of in your own communities. And I've co-facilitated that since the beginning of this work in 2006. And we also have a specialized youth program that has grown fairly significantly within the last 5 years or so. We have 3 full-time youth case managers and a coordinator of that program. And we're seeing about 175 youth each year. And by seeing, that could mean, intensive case management, or for, daily for a year, or it could be just a one touch. So we serve both those who are confirmed survivors of human trafficking and youth that are at high risk for trafficking. So we'll talk a little bit more about those distinctions later in our presentation. But as I talked about our program, I also want to underscore the expertise that I do not have, because I think that's equally important. We do not have a URM program in Buffalo. The closest one is in Rochester, New York. I hope there's some folks on the phone today from Rochester. But that is not my area of expertise. And we are also at the Institute not clinicians. So what we really try to do is focus very specifically on intensive case management for survivors of human trafficking. And that involves, more than anything else, safety planning. So again, I know that there are obviously URM programs on the phone. I know there are clinicians on the phone, and I really hope that we can collaborate as we walk through this presentation. Oh, and I see in the chat, there's a bunch of us from Rochester. So hi, Western New York. I also wanted to mention just very quickly that the other thing I am is, well, until very recently, as a foster parent. I recently adopted my son, who I had fostered since he was 12 months old, and I had him as a foster child for 4.5 years before adopting him. So I have a little bit of that perspective as well. And I know that that will has shaped my lens when it comes to the information that I'll be walking through today. So by the end of the webinar, we very much hope that we will help all of you better identify warning signs for human trafficking amongst the cases that come across your desk and into your office. We will talk specifically about the various components of a strong safety plan, one that's holistic in nature. We'll also describe when and how to develop a safety plan. I'll give a couple of samples, including the one that we use at the International Institute that can hopefully be utilized to review your own safety planning skills, or even perhaps broaden them. And then we're also going to describe, and really I'm hoping you will be able to identify a robust number of partners within your community that have various areas of expertise when it comes to identifying and serving this population. So we'll start with a poll. I am really interested about your own experience in working with survivors. So how many trafficking survivors have you worked with over the past year? And you'll see that there's a bunch of options here. Again, it's a little bit difficult. I can already see that there's various areas of experience here, and sometimes that's difficult to plan for. So I hope that I'm excited to see that that 1 to 10 seems to be the most popular choice there. So the majority of people do have some experience working with trafficking survivors, but maybe very few that it's their entire caseload. So I definitely will see that some of the information we share today will hopefully be helpful to some of you who don't know if you're seeing trafficking survivors, those who haven't yet seen a survivor who picked 0, and then those who are somewhere in the middle. Go to the next poll, please. I'm just interested in your confidence level here in identification. What's your level of confidence in identifying indicators of sex trafficking? Let's just give everyone a couple of seconds to answer here. All right, seeing a lower percentage of I got this. So those 5 or 6 of you who have said that, I'm counting on you to chime in here with your expertise, but it looks like there's really people are along the spectrum here, and that makes me feel like there'll be a lot of useful information. So that's great to see. We're going to launch the next poll that's asking the same question, but around labor trafficking. What's your confidence level in identifying indicators of labor trafficking? Again, 1 being on the lower end and 5 being on the highest end. I'll give everybody a couple seconds to finish. Okay, so it's fairly similar, but if we go to the next slide, I think that, or let's just keep it here. I think that that is not uncommon, that most people are more familiar with sex trafficking over labor trafficking. And so we're going to make sure that we talk about both today and why it's important to identify both. There's a case scenario, Leo, who we're going to be reviewing at several points throughout the presentation today. While this scenario, I think, may not be unusual for those of you on the call, and we'll be using this as an example, what I very much hope is that as we walk through the presentation today, that maybe on the side, you're jotting down a couple of cases that today's presentation might cause you to think about a little bit differently. What I always feel like that the best presentations I go to are when I leave that presentation with a scratch sheet of paper and a couple of things to follow up on, because while I hope this is interesting, more important than being interesting, I really want it to be useful to those of you on the call. So I think the best way that it can be useful is to change your lens or broaden your lens a little bit when it comes to what human trafficking is, what it can look like, what those indicators are. And maybe there's a couple of cases that you will see differently and do some follow-up on. But we'll be talking specifically about Leo's case. Imagine you are a URM caseworker, which I think many of you don't have to imagine. You're reviewing Leo's case and you see some of these details. He's 17, a few months ago, he was seen at an emergency room. The staff established he had not had medical care and that the fungus on his feet came from the fact that he had been walking for several days. He wasn't exactly sure what city he was in. And then child welfare determined he did not have anyone to care for him in the US and was therefore referred to a URM program. And then Leo meets you. He shares a little bit more that he was brought to the country by a family friend. And that person told him that he would be paid for full-time work on a construction site. But once he got here, Leo was moved around, working in various industries. He was paid, but also had to pay for his room and board wherever he was. There was someone that tried to leave from who was in a similar situation and was beaten when he tried to leave. Leo escaped and walked until he found someone who could help him. So this is a scenario that I hope would be something not unusual. It's certainly the type of case that we would see at the Institute. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about indicators. There was a lot of questions in the pre-poll for this webinar around indicators. If we could go to the next slide. So I want to just make sure, not spend a ton of time on this, but just make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to what is it when we're talking about human trafficking. The way that I spend a lot of my life in these three boxes. Basically what human trafficking comes down to is that first blue box of how did the person get into the situation? The orange box is how were they kept in the situation? And the last box is for what purpose, why was the trafficker doing it? And that always comes down to making money. I like to think, because I also do oversee domestic violence services, we know that domestic violence is all about power and control, and human trafficking is about power and control for profit. It's really important to know that in order to meet the federal definition of human trafficking, that middle orange box does not, that criteria does not, is not considered for minors. And so we're really just looking at the blue and the pink boxes. However, there is almost always some type of force or fraud or coercion in every trafficking case, no matter what the age of the victim. So I just wanted to review these quickly to make sure that we are on the same page about when we're defining human trafficking. Next slide, please. Thanks. So when we're thinking about types of trafficking, again, most people are way more familiar with sex trafficking. The media loves to talk about sex trafficking. Almost every presentation that I'm asked to do, can you come and do a presentation about sex trafficking? And labor is often left out of the conversation. I will say that labor is much more often identified in the foreign national population. And so I was happy to see that those of you who are participating are almost as confident with both sex and labor trafficking. That's a great sign. I also have to say that it is very rare in my experience that someone who is trafficked does not experience types of exploitation within both the labor and sexual realm. So there's a question here. I was just going to address it. So thank you. That's perfect. So if someone is sold to a customer for sex, and there is no other types of labor involved, that's typically seen as sex trafficking only. And that certainly is true within the statutes. However, philosophically, there are many advocates that see sex as a form of labor. And so again, what we want to make sure, to us, it doesn't really matter as advocates and service providers, how we're defining the type of trafficking. What we want to get at is really how is it meaningful to the client, right? What are the indicators? What are the examples or red flags of exploitation? And then, and how was that meaningful to the client that we're working with? I want to be really clear that that those of you on participating in the training today, I don't ever want you to think that you have to be experts in trafficking. You all have enough on your plate. You have a lot of job responsibilities. Today, what we're talking about is how can we just be a little bit better about identifying the red flags so that we know when it's appropriate to reach out to a community partner who is an expert in human trafficking to support our work in that way. So again, I think that nationally, what our statistics show is that we are not great at screening boys for sex trafficking, and we're not great at screening girls and any US citizen for labor trafficking, which I just think is really interesting. I think that really points to the preconceived notions that we have either due to the media's over focus on sex trafficking, not to say that it's not important, but I know even when I'm dealing with the media or I'm thinking about how to advertise for a program, that I tend to get a lot less interest if I'm talking, solely about labor trafficking. So it's important in thinking about your own practice, is there any bias that you have if you have a young boy in front of you, or if you have a 17-year-old girl, might your screening look different? Or can you check yourself to make sure that you are screening appropriately for various indicators, for both sex and labor trafficking? Okay, next slide. So I'm interested, again, I was happy to see that almost all of you have worked with at least one survivor over the last year. I'm interested in what settings or industries those survivors that you're working with were exploited in. So if you could just use the chat box and share some of those experiences.
Like Amy said, please type your answers in the chat. Be sure to send your chat messages to all panelists and attendees so that we're all able to view your answers. We'll give you about a minute or two for this question. And as you're typing your question, I'll just share my observation among the URMs that I have worked with. Prior to joining Switchboard, I actually spent much of my time working with unaccompanied minors in the Seattle office with Lutheran Community Services. I'm sure I have a few staff here that are joining us from that office. My years of experience working with URMs, I can share that we as service providers initially rely on referring agencies and or receiving documents to get any relevant or background information around red flags or exploitation that may have occurred. So screening, I'm super interested and excited to see what you're going to share with us today, Amy. We know that age is the primary factor for vulnerability, and it's also worthy to note that there could be a gap between the time that children leave the trafficking situation and the age that children are initially trafficked could be also calculated wrong or inaccurately. We had clients exploited in a wide variety of industries and settings, including domestic servitude, retail personal care services, hair braiding, house cleaning, construction, manual labor, restaurant work, agricultural processing. And that some children were relatively isolated in people's homes while others were allowed to be in contact with the general public and retail. I'll end there just because I want to hear what people have written. So Amy, I turn it over to you to see what we have in our chat box since you're probably looking at that.
I am, and you just got a shout out from Seattle, so that's very exciting. So I'm really so interested to see that most of the examples that are here are examples of labor trafficking. That actually makes me feel so good because, again, a lot of presentations I do, there's so little known about labor trafficking. So we saw running drugs, construction, lots of examples of domestic work and agriculture, also restaurants, dancing in clubs, hair braiding, and magazine sales. So absolutely, those are really in line with what we've seen at the Institute. We actually had, I think that this diversity of examples is really important because I know that when I started doing this work in 2006, I assumed that all of the cases that would be brought in would be agricultural cases and forced sex work. That's kind of what I knew of trafficking before I started. And I'll never forget the day that we had a referral where a 16-year-old and her mother were being trafficked at an ice cream parlor. And I thought, wow, like this, it's just never what I would have thought of. But it really isn't about the industry. It's about those three boxes that I indicated earlier. So I think it's, again, really important that we continue to widen our scope of the what industries or settings trafficking can take place in. We've had a few at car washes. We've had some at convenience stores, some cases at convenience stores, and then all types of sex work. I see massage parlors here, certainly online or street-based or hotel or motel-based sex work. But we also have had a couple of cases where there's been sex hotlines that people have called into, and that's been something, again, that a question I wouldn't have thought to ask in my screening. So again, it's not about the industry. It really is about the way in which somebody was exploited for monetary gain by the trafficker. Thanks, everybody, for your participation there. We'll go on to the next slide. So one of the things that we've been talking about nationally a lot more, and I say trend not because the type of exploitation is trending or new. I think we're just getting better at identifying it. That's a question that's often asked of us, you know, why are the numbers going up? And what I can say with a lot of confidence actually is that the more people know about trafficking, the more we're able to identify it. It doesn't mean that it's happening more often. It just means that we're getting better at identifying it. So it's really, again, it was quite affirming to see that several of you mentioned forced criminalization industries in your examples. So traffickers will force their victims, often young victims, to shoplift or to sell or run drugs, weapons possession, and we've even seen examples of assault. We had a case recently where a trafficker had brought in a minor with false paperwork saying he was older than he was, and they were on their way to the construction site one morning to start work. And he was in the passenger seat. And when they were pulled over for a traffic stop, the trafficker put the gun in the lap of the victim, the 17-year-old. He was brought to the DA's office, questioned, charged with a felony. He was undocumented. And if not for some of the training that we had done, it would be very possible that he would have been deported because of a felony conviction. So again, a lot of dynamics there, but something that several years ago, I would never have really thought of as a type of trafficking. I would have maybe thought of the site much more than the weapons possession or even selling weapons. One of the things I also wanted to mention around forced criminalization is that prostitution is illegal. And although the field sees that, or some do, more and more do, I think, see forced sex work as trafficking within a criminal enterprise, I think that our field is a little bit slower in seeing labor trafficking within these criminal enterprises. And so I think it's something that we're trying to do more awareness raising of, and something that like I said, I'm really happy that many of you are already aware of. Next slide, please. So I will be very transparent about my nerdiness here and admitting that this is my favorite slide of any PowerPoint presentation that I ever do. I try to make it, I put it into every PowerPoint presentation because I think it was so eye-opening to me. Often people ask, you know, what's the difference between labor exploitation and labor trafficking? And so this is a study I wanted to highlight. It is part of your materials, your resource materials, understanding the organization, operation, and victimization process of labor trafficking. It's really been the only significant study of labor trafficking within the United States. I hope that you will take a little bit of time to read it, but what this shows, what the authors of this study are showing us here in this slide is that there really is a diversity of types of exploitation and trafficking that victims experience. So you'll see here that 83% are paid less than they were promised. If it's just that, that is probably just labor trafficking. But almost as many also experienced intimidation and control, demoralizing, threats of use of violence, depriving or disorienting. So when you see those various types of force, fraud, or coercion used together, then that meets the definition of trafficking. Again, you don't need that force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to minors, but I think it's helpful to understand that there is a continuum of labor exploitation and trafficking. But if we're asking the right questions, more often than not, there is the trafficking that's happening. I also wanted to give you all a heads up to be looking out for a study that will be released likely next year. It's currently underway, where they are, these same authors are looking at minor victims of labor trafficking and studying that community. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about risks of trafficking, we often refer to push factors and pull factors. As you read through these factors, I'm sure none of them are unfamiliar to you, and many of them are the exact same factors that you're seeing with URM clients. So what are those factors that are causing them out of their, to leave their country of origin? And then what are those that are really pulling them to the United States? And the last few there under pull factors, I think, are what we see and is perhaps the most heartbreaking, but there really is that hope. And I wanted to underscore it there because traffickers are masters at exploiting that opportunity and the American dream and hope. One of the things that that's what makes it really difficult is that, and is part, I think, of the trauma when they arrive and they see that they were promised something that doesn't exist and will be exploited instead. So as you're working with these clients who may have experienced trafficking, part of the trauma is that deception, that fraud that they were sold when, I'm sorry, that idea that was sold, they were probably sold also when they get to the United States. Again, very similar, I'm sure, to a lot of the factors that you see in all URM populations. Next slide, please. So again, we have another poll here. I'm interested in what your screening process looks like. Is it formal? Is it more informal? Maybe you don't screen at all, either formally or informally, or maybe you're just counting on outside agency referrals to tell you whether that person's been trafficked. So I'll just give you a minute, just a couple more seconds to answer here. Okay, so it looks like that there's, again, a mixed bag. I'm really happy to see that the lowest number by far is that there's that you don't do any type of screening. I think that's fantastic. That there's a third of you are doing some formal or informal, and also counting on referring agencies. So to me, that indicates that you do have some strong community partnerships. And I think that's great. The other thing I wanted to just mention quickly is the why of screening. And we can just go to the next slide, but that's another question that I often get. Like, why is it important to screen for trafficking? They're here, we're gonna do a needs assessment for what services they're looking for. The services that we offer are often pretty consistent. Like, what's the value of knowing all of the ways in which somebody may have experienced trauma? And I think that there's a couple of answers to that. One is that it's not always important. And you don't know that. So I think that that's, you don't know whether the identification as a victim of human trafficking will be validating to the person that you're working with, but it might. And so I think that it's important to screen in order to see if some of the value is there. So for example, it may open up a different immigration status with the immigration attorney that you're working with. While I know that most minors can qualify for various forms of immigration status, for a particular youth, a T visa might be their best route. And again, that isn't up to you, but that information that you might get from a client might be valuable to the immigration attorney. I think it's also one of the reasons that we really focus on holistic screening is that while I might assume from my perspective that someone's sex trafficking experience was the most traumatic, I've been proven wrong over and over again that because everyone is an individual, we don't know what trauma and untreated trauma has been the most damaging. And so being able to name, validate, and help heal every type of trauma that someone has experienced is very important. And we want to make sure that survivors identify for themselves the priority of experiences that will lead to their healing. The other thing is that it can really shape your understanding of this person and their needs. What we know about untreated trauma is that it often leads to further victimization. Those who have untreated trauma often have a much higher rate of substance use or mental health issues. They have trouble forming healthy relationships. And again, that's not predetermined, but certainly those predispositions are there. So having the knowledge of the background of trauma involving trafficking can help you anticipate and perhaps meet the needs better of those that you're working with. So at this time, I just wanted to share a couple of examples of screening tools. Just give me 1 second. So there's two screening tools here that I want to share. The first is was piloted and validated specifically with the RHY population, runaway and homeless youth. So you can find this, again, this is in your resource, the resources that we put together for you today. There's an executive summary. They talk about the different sites and the findings, and this screening tool was considered validated. There's there's a short form, and then this is the longer form. So, and this is comprehensive of both types, or inclusive of both types of trafficking. So this may be helpful. I'll share another screening with you as well. In looking over your formal or informal training to see the wording here. And again, in both of these screening tools that are in your resources and that I will review, the wording was very important. And there was actually a lot of survivor input in how these questions were asked. I can say that in my career, we have probably served, oh goodness, upwards of 2,500 survivors of trafficking. And I can count on one hand the number of times where someone has called and said, I need services, I'm a human trafficking victim. And I've never had someone say, I'm a victim of labor trafficking. So we really have to ask these questions in a way that, that may allow the survivor to think about their experience in a different way. So again, I don't want to read all of these to you, but these are some of the questions, the indicators. I really like how it starts with, did someone you work for? A lot of individuals, especially minors who developmentally may not have the nuance yet to be able to dissect or analyze their exploitation, they actually take a lot of pride in the fact that they've worked. And so we never want to minimize that by saying, were you trafficked or did you illegally do this? In fact, we want to just talk about those circumstances under which they were working. So asking it in that way, again, not with a checklist, but more in informal conversation, you may see some of these indicators. They didn't get to keep their money or their documents. They were promised a wage and then paid less, or they had to pay for other things like room and board, that type of thing. Obviously, physical harm, a lot of tricking. That was a word that that a lot of survivors identified with, that they were tricked into doing different types of work. a lot of threats to be deported or to harm family members, either here or in their country of origin. Um,
Amy, there's a question there if this comes in different languages.
I don't think in the executive summary I've seen it translated, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen it in translated into the study. So I think the study was just trying to show what the validated questions were. I don't think that they distributed the tool to anyone. Thank you. Any questions on any of these indicators? 7 and 8 are ones that we see a lot, restricts or control of where they went or who they talked to. And again, traffickers are master manipulators. So a lot of this is pitched to their victims in a way that is about protection. People don't like people who look like you in this country, and we don't want anyone calling ICE. And so you really need to stay inside because this is where you're safe and this is how I can protect you, that type of thing. This is another tool. Tigist, can you see this now, the second tool?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So this is the tool that is mandated actually in New York State. Again, it's available in your resources, and I do think that they have this translated into Spanish. New York State requires that any child that touches the child welfare system be screened for sex trafficking annually. The Institute actually is working to expand that within Erie County, where we're located, to include labor trafficking. And we very much hope that the state will expand some of these questions as well. These are asked in a little bit of a different way and more focused on all of child welfare rather than just the RHY population. Again, there's no right or wrong necessarily in checklists. I know this is a checklist, but it's not something we sit down and check off as we ask potential survivors. But again, I think these indicators are really helpful in thinking about should this person be screened more thoroughly by someone who's an expert. And so that's what actually we do it a lot at the Institute. We're not doing direct outreach. We're not out on the streets. Really what our role is to get calls from folks like you who say, our screening came up. There's a couple of indicators. Would you mind coming in and doing a more thorough screening with this youth? So you'll see here, and again, this is in your resources, so you'll be able to review it more thoroughly. So we're going to go back to talking about community partners. I put up a couple of examples here. Again, one of the things I think that's really important is that nobody on this call is thinking I need to be the expert in human trafficking. What we hope is that you already are connected with your local human trafficking provider. If you don't have someone in your community who specializes in human trafficking, typically domestic violence or sexual assault programs will serve trafficking survivors. There are now over 50 human trafficking task forces across the country. So it is likely that you have a task force in your community with a service provider that co-facilitates that task force. They're another great resource. Obviously, immigration attorneys, you all work with them. They can be a great resources in coming in to train or to make those referrals. And then while you may have an investigator that you really like and you really trust, that could be a great resource to you as well. But if you don't, it's helpful to reach out first to the victim witness coordinator at the FBI in particular, who specialize in minors, who can help you do a more thorough screening. Or even what we like to do is, I always say, send me your screening form and let's walk through it together. And then sometimes we'll have some suggestions on how that screening form can be expanded, how questions may be able to be asked differently, that type of thing. Again, only to increase the accuracy of indicators so that we can do a more thorough screening later. And next slide, please. So we look at Leo's case here. What I want to talk about is, what are the red flags that you see here in Leo's case, or maybe some of the susceptibilities that Leo may have had prior to being trafficked. If you could use the chat box, I want to put Leo's case back up so that you can go through it. But what are some of those potential indicators that you see in his case? If you reviewed Leo's file, what might be something that you think, this really deserves more discussion, or a potential reaching out to a community partner? And I see here, not sure what city he's in. That's a big one. Lack of medical care, no family, being disoriented. So those being beaten in front of Leo, certainly that's a form of coercion that we often see if the person is not beaten for trying to leave themselves. Frequent moving of locations, and also not that fraud of not being put into the type of work that he was originally promised. So, yep, you guys got it. That's great. Thank you. Thanks for your participation here. I also want to say that he may not have been trafficked, right? Not one or two indicators does not mean that definition has been met. But I think that there's certainly enough red flags in this scenario to bring to your supervisor, or to do some outreach to an expert community organization to do a more thorough screening. Thanks everybody for participating. We'll take a quick break. Okay. So we talked a lot about, in the first part of the presentation, we talked a lot about those red flags. What's trafficking? What does it look like? What does it look like where you are? How do we screen? Now we're going to talk about the next part, which is the safety planning part. And we're going to start by talking about our philosophy of services at the International Institute, which is always a work in progress. But I think that before we even get into the nitty-gritty of safety planning, which frankly, anyone can train you on how to safety plan, without rapport, without these philosophies of services in place, it really doesn't matter what safety planning you do, because you may not have the information you need to safety plan effectively. So at the International Institute, we talk a lot about being trauma informed. We talk a lot about being harm reductionist. And then we also talk about shared decision making, even with youth. I think And again, I know the level of expertise on this call, so I'm really looking forward to your thoughts and questions about these types of philosophies. But I supervise a program. The youngest survivor we've ever worked with has been 9, and the oldest is 83. So we serve the gamut. And what I'm always very interested in is that the systems that we work with, not internally, if someone is, 17 years old and 10 months, they are deemed as not possibly being able to make decisions for themselves. But when you're an adult, suddenly you're old enough to make those decisions. And I just find that super interesting. And so what we do with systems is we do a lot of pushback around that, because it's best practice and because we've seen it being much more effective. So I just want to walk through this a little bit. Go to the next slide, please. So we have a lot of mantras in our office. Again, nothing you would ever see on a grant application, nothing you would ever see on it's not our formal mission statement, but we have these phrases that we use. And I wonder if you have some of those that you're talking about in supervision or case conferencing. I'd love to hear those if you don't mind sharing them in the chat. But I want to talk about a couple of ours. So one is that survivors have kept themselves alive for a long time without me. And that I think goes hand in hand with the next mantra, which is that survivors are the experts on their lives and we're the experts on resources. It's important to come from this strengths-based perspective, that the youth that you are working with have made a ton of decisions before they ever sat face-to-face with you. And those decisions have kept them alive. So they actually have a ton of expertise in what they need and how they need it. What they may not know is that there are also other options available to them. So that's where we see our job, in not judging what decisions they've made, but instead broadening the types of decisions that are attractive to them. And so I think coming from that strengths-based perspective is really important. I see in the chat here a similar mantra from Anna. So thank you so much for sharing that. The other one here is that people in pain need kind treatment. This is really a mantra that we mention around how individuals express their pain. Most of us in the office find it a lot easier to work with those that have been traumatized when they are crying and sobbing and asking for help. Whereas those who are angry, who are throwing things, swearing at us, leaving us voicemails that are, I can't even believe, that those are harder clients to work with. But how someone deals with their trauma, their specific, your specific coping mechanisms are not often chosen. And so it's just important that all of that is pain. We have to remember that all of that is pain. And so these are some of the things that, again, that we're always talking about. Any others that I'll let you keep sharing in the chat as we move on. So when we're thinking about what works and what doesn't work, what we know works is that services are individualized, they're low barrier. We normalize planning for safety. So I said that safety planning was the service that we offer the most at the Institute. And when I say that, I mean that we safety plan with every client every single time we talk to them, so that it's just a normal part of what we do. We're going to talk a little bit more about shared decision-making, compassionate honesty. I think this is really important too. As you, I'm sure, are well aware, I'm sure that if you are all in front of me, I'd see some nodding here. Those who have experienced trauma or have the backgrounds of the clients that we see, they can smell dishonesty a mile away. And so being transparent is not only part of being trauma informed, but it also serves the client well because then they can make decisions based on what is true. So it not only improves your relationship with the client to be honest and to establish rapport, it also allows clients to make better decisions for their next steps. The other part that what works is practice. Any minor doesn't know how to make every decision perfectly. I would actually say that as adults too, but what we need to make room for is practice in their decision making. And what we know about trauma is that it often affects the biochemical ability for someone to make healthy decisions. And so that's why practice in a atmosphere that is non-judgmental is so important. What doesn't work? Being prescriptive, that word should, anything that's mandatory. We actually make sure that when we are partnering with outside organizations that we underscore that our services are never mandatory. And if it's mandatory for minors to meet with us, then we don't put any prescription on what meet means. So that can literally mean showing up to get a bus pass, and that counts as a meeting. Again, all in the service of establishing rapport and trust with people who should not trust us and should not trust systems immediately. And this other dichotomy, and this is what I'm going to talk about the most today, is that this decision is safe and this decision is unsafe, or this is bad or this is good. That dichotomy doesn't work. Instead, what we want to focus on is how can we help make the youth that you work with, I keep wanting to say survivors because that's what I'm used to. How can we help them make safer choices? Next slide, please. So I'm hoping that you are all very familiar with the guiding principles of trauma-informed approaches. Again, you also don't need to be experts on trauma treatment, although I'm guessing that some clinicians on this call are. But everyone working with youth, vulnerable youth, should have some expertise, certainly some familiarity with these principles of trauma-informed approach. Part of that approach is having the knowledge of how trauma affects one's willingness to engage in services. So these 6 principles are things that we're talking about all the time within our program. Physical and emotional safety is what we're going to be talking the most about today. And obviously there's overlap within a lot of these approaches. Again, I would encourage, this is a resource I've included as well, but I would encourage anyone on the call to reach out to their local Masters in Social Work program, or even some federal folks who can do a deeper dive into trauma-informed care. It's actually my favorite topic to train on, and because it's been the most services shifting data and information within my career. So we're really always talking about these principles when it comes to building rapport. Again, without establishing safety, without being transparent, you're never going to get the information that you need to make a solid, effective safety plan with a client. And that's our goal here. If they're only telling you part of the story, then that safety plan is not going to address all of the potential risks and harms that a survivor may be potentially experiencing. Of course, the mantra of trauma-informed care is that we stop asking what's wrong with you and we start asking what happened to you. So again, in thinking about a survivor's behavior, we don't think, what's wrong with them? They're screaming screaming at me on their voicemail, or they didn't show up again. But we think instead, what happened to them that they believe that this behavior is, that this is their go-to behavior. And that allows us to blame the person who caused the trauma instead of the person who experienced the trauma. Harm reduction, again, I hope this is another philosophy that most of you are quite familiar with. It's something that focuses on making situations safer, not on forcing safety, which is, by the way, something we can't do. The only person that can keep a youth safe is the person that's trying to harm them. And I hate saying that. I wish there was another answer, but especially in the trafficking and dating violence situations that we see with our youth, the perpetrator is really the only one that can guarantee safety. And so what we want to do is make sure that all of the youth that we work with have thought through and believe that there's a safe place with us that they can think about in this scenario. How would I keep myself safer if I encounter it? So again, no judgment, safe space, practice, and really focusing on positive change in a step-by-step way. I think if you would think of your own life in a big decision that you had to make, whether it was to change a job or to leave an unhealthy relationship, or even to get rid of the car that you've put so much money into trying to salvage, you never make those relationships because someone says you should do that, that's bad for you. Big decisions are made slowly, and they're made when somebody can talk out the pros and cons and take steps into a safer decision. And creating that space and rapport with the clients that you're serving is really the way to get there. So when we're, if we go to the next slide, the next kind of examples of harm reduction, one of the things we see all the time is that clients are not allowed access to their phone. Again, that's a mandate. Clients are going to have phones. And so how do we work with our youth to help them utilize their technology in a way that's safer? Again, technology is huge. So really talking about and having trainings on safer technology, increasing safety in relationships, and this goes to dating violence, but also safer coping strategies. So one of the examples that may seem really extreme to other providers, but what we know to be best practice is that if we have someone, a youth who we suspect or know to have a pretty significant drug problem, is that we talk to them about safer ways to use drugs, or we talk to them about, and again, we're not making any suggestions or providing them with safer drugs, but what we are doing is talking to them about the realities of, for example, the use of opioids and the long-term and significant effects of that versus the use of marijuana. And so we're giving them facts so that they can walk into something that's safer instead of safe. We also want to bridge communication with family and other systems. We don't want, even if we know that the exploitation happened from a family member, if we say, don't talk to them, they're not safe, what are they going to do? They're going to talk to them, right? They're their family. And so instead, if we pose the question of, like, let's talk about what a conversation looks like. Can you put a time limit on it? Can you make sure that they're on speaker and there's somebody else in the room in case things get heated? So there's all kinds of harm reduction strategies that can happen, again, to keep those lines of communication open with the youth that you're serving and help them walk into safer decisions. One of the things that we feel really proud of the Institute, and it's something we work really hard at, is making sure that youth can call us anytime, no matter where they are or if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, and I think, again, I don't know the parameters of all of your programs, but we make sure whenever a youth calls us, even if they've run away or if they're high or if They've left their foster parents' home, that we are eager to speak with them and immediately help them safety plan wherever they are. Next slide. Shared decision-making is a relatively new philosophy. And again, these are in your resources. There's some articles, 2 articles I think that I included there. But one of the things that I just wanted to share from the executive summary of one of those articles is this. It really stood out to me. So we believe in the human rights of a child, and yet these rights are rarely afforded to sexually exploited children due to the well-meaning and yet paternalistic notion that youth are incapable of making smart decisions for themselves. And so shared decision-making is actually an approach around keeping youth engaged and giving them a voice in the process that sometimes systems overtake and make for youth. What we want is for youth, while they are with safe people, to have that practice to practice making decisions, which will not be perfect, but where they can come back and digest and process that decision in a safe place and think about how they may tweak that decision-making process in the future. So I encourage everybody to read those articles that I included in that are in the chat box now too. Next slide. So we'll get a little bit we'll review some nitty-gritty of safety planning before we get to the Q&A. Again, there's all types of safety planning, and I want to make sure that we're thinking holistically when we're thinking about safety, because an emotional trigger can lead to having less physical safety, and we want to think about it in all of these realms. Next slide, please. So again, just trying to get an idea of the type of safety planning that is done in your settings. What kind of safety planning do you engage in? How holistic is it? I'll give everybody a few seconds to answer. This is awesome, and yet also expected, right? Home and school, emotional, those are things I think that in technology, even more so lately, that we're thinking about. And I love that I'm seeing this leaving come up more. And I wonder if that means a planned leaving, or also someone who's leaving who's not supposed to leave. And so I'd encourage that both take place. So this is great. And it seems like you guys are doing a really good job. I wanted to share, I think our next slide is the Institute's plan. Is that right? Oh, sorry, the when. So again, going back to the poll, when should you safety plan? And the real answer is every chance you get, which is that last bullet point there. When a youth is leaving a risky situation, when they're still in contact with an unsafe person, again, that may be their family, that may be the trafficker that they're in love with. So saying that's not safe, frankly, hasn't been their experience, or it's certainly not their emotional experience, or perhaps abuse within their family of origin has predisposed them to enter into the trafficking situation. And so they may see this as normal. So that safety planning is to minimize harm and to help the youth plan for to be safer. I feel like a broken record, but I think that is just a different way to think about it, that's so important. It's also important to remember that when someone is minimizing contact and making better decisions, that's a threat to the person that's exploited them. And therefore, the tactics will likely escalate. So it's important that youth understand that often the most dangerous time is when they're leaving a situation or a relationship. And so extra safety planning when different decisions are being made is important. It's like any stage of change. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share here our safety plan that we use for youth. And again, it's not perfect, but, oh, and this is the wrong thing, sorry. There we go. But I just wanted to walk through it. So this is not something we hand a survivor unless that they would like. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we say, here, why don't you take some time with this? If it's in fact safe for them to carry papers with them that indicate they're working with us, and let's review it together. So some that are more.
Amy, sorry to interrupt. We can just see the files. We can't see the PDF yet.
Let's try again. Sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. Yes?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. So these are all the different parts of safety planning that we indicated in the poll. So lots around who can be a support, who they can ask for help when they have to leave in an emergency. We also, and there's some very practical things here, often when what we know is that when someone's triggered or when they're scared, they forget a lot of their plan. So having numbers, having names written down, especially for someone who developmentally may need that, can be really helpful. I'm going to come back to our well-being safety plan. We have a lot of everyday safety tips that we review on an ongoing basis. We obviously don't walk through this entire safety plan every time we meet with a client, but we ask them about different circumstances that have changed and then focus on the type of the plan, the aspect of the plan that may not be as relevant anymore or may need some updating given their change in circumstances.
Amy, can I just add that I thought this was super helpful in that, as like you just said, as youth are changing their settings of, moving from either a group home into a foster parent, that safety planning looks different. When they're living on their own, that safety plan looks different. And so I think sometimes it feels like there's so many documents that have to be reviewed, but really important for the setting that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tigest. That's really helpful. A lot of reminders here around technology that a lot of you, I think, are doing anyway. Again, this has been controversial in some of the trainings I've given, but if you know someone, a youth, to be a runner, it's a terrible thing, but someone who is their trauma response is to leave. And I will also say that we punish youth very often for running when actually it's a very understandable and normal trauma response. And in fact is a strength when they're running away from someone who's exploiting them. And so it's one of the trainings we do a lot with foster parents and with group home residential settings, is that running away could you ever see that as a strength? And so that we're not shaming or punishing someone for a normal trauma response. And so we talk about that with youth. We say, hey, I know you may be thinking about leaving, and if you ever do, here's some things to be thinking about. And know that you're always welcome back here, at least to call us so we can figure out something together and help keep you safer. This is our well-being safety plan. This is what we're talking to the youth that we work with around when they get triggered. What are your triggers? How do I know when I'm starting to feel anxious? What are those things in my body? What's happening with my thoughts? How can I recognize that before I'm in a full-blown panic, having an anxiety attack, or after I've already run out the door? And then what are the different interventions that I can utilize in order to counter that anxiety or trigger, whatever the trigger has caused? So expressing feelings, what are the ways I'm going to be distracted, who can support me, and who are those contacts that I need? And then these are specific, obviously, to Erie County, but it's something that we want the survivors that we work with to always have with them our numbers so that they can call if it's not ours. Go to the next. Thanks, Rebecca. So here, I just want to say also that you should not be experts on safety planning, that's something I think that is really helpful to review on a regular basis and can also be specific. There's specific safety planning that we do with LGBTQI youth. So I would ask, we actually do this too, even though we're working with trafficked youth and trafficking survivors every single day. And even though we run a domestic violence program, we still have our certified domestic violence shelter in Erie County come in and train our staff every year, because the most vulnerable victims are typically staying at shelter. And so we believe that the shelter staff has even more expertise than we do around what tactics abusers are utilizing. And we have learned so much from that shelter staff, especially around technology, which moves really fast, and what those tactics are, so that we can help survivors have a better safety plan. Obviously, HRY programs will be similar in having that expertise in safety planning. And then, like I said before, those that work with gay and lesbian youth may have some expertise to share around safety planning for their population, the populations that they're experts in working with. Next slide, please. So again, here's Leo, and I'll just give you a second to walk through this, but or to remind yourself. But I wonder, again, in the chat, if you could share just a couple of things that you might do with Leo to help with safety planning. What do you know about how he's handled trauma in the past? How has he kept himself safe before? What are his circumstances now? And what's one or two things, what areas of safety that you may address with Leo while you're creating a safety plan with him?
I just want to remind folks to send their messages and comments to all panelists and attendees as you're sharing some really important information so that everyone can see it.
Good, lots of people want to make sure that he has appropriate clothing and shoes in case he leaves again. Anything else? So one of the things that I would really want to stress, I think, with Leo, you know, there could be some some safety planning around numbers, is to really affirm that he kept himself alive by running away and asking for help. And so how can he do that again? Right, really coming from that strength-based perspective and thinking about, you know, if he was in a similar situation again, what could he do that would be safer, even safer than what he did before? So where are those safe places? And who can he call, and how can he stay safe if he is somewhere in the middle of the night with no resources? All of that, I think, can be really helpful in creating that. So it's great. Tigist, do you want to review?
Yes. It's now time for our Q&A session, and I'll kick us off with a few questions we received during our pre-registration. Most of the questions asked we can hopefully have answered during the webinar, and so we'll start with a few, and I think there's two that we saw that we'll hopefully get to. The first question we received was, if a trafficking victim seems to have been processed their experience, if a trafficking victim seems to have processed their experience, why is it still important to do safety planning?
So processing one's processing one's experience doesn't automatically, in my experience at least, come with a safety plan. And so I think that those two things aren't always connected depending on the clinician who's helped somebody process it. So one of the things that we're talking about, and perhaps they don't need to do any more safety planning, but we're talking about ACEs all the time. We're doing those ACE scores, talking about the vulnerabilities that one may have to further trauma if they have had trauma before. We're just trying to be honest with them, and then again, trying to affirm that processing. So, we definitely have had youth who come to us after they've been out of the situation for quite a while, and who are making better decisions. And maybe then a safety plan is less important than some other needs that they have, but we just want to always bring it up so that we are giving them permission to talk about some of the dangers that they might be worried about, or things, again, just giving them permission to bring those things up with us.
Thank you, Amy. Another question we received was, what can you do when the county DHS does not take further action?
I don't know what further action means. So maybe like you call this like a child abuse or neglect, and that, right. Oh, I don't know. Has anyone experienced that here? Right. That's like everybody's daily experience, I think sometimes. So I think two things, right? We always talk about our work at the Institute as being two arms. Can you see that? We always talk about the right arm being how we support our clients, and then the left arm being how we train systems to better and more appropriately work with the survivors that we encounter, because we can't do it all by ourselves, right? So I think that, frankly, acknowledging that systems are not going to respond the way that we always think that they should. And so then what are your choices? The county's job often is to, they only see getting involved as the most extreme situations. However, what we know is that some of those smaller types of exploitation often lead to much bigger types of exploitation. So again, being really transparent and honest with the client, being honest with them about that fact, right? Even if we're only seeing small indicators of exploitation, they often grow. We will use oh, I'm sorry that I did not include this in the resources, but you can just Google it. There are both sex and labor trafficking power and control wheels. And so sometimes we will use that as an exercise with survivors to say, take a highlighter and let's talk about economic, let's talk about sexual, let's talk about emotional types of exploitation. And that may open their eyes better to some of the danger that they're in. And then again, help you make a more adequate safety plan so that if something more severe begins, then the two of you can reach back out to the county or to another system who may provide better protection.
Thank you, Amy. One of the questions that just came in is, do safety planning always have to be formal or on a paper?
Oh, goodness, no. We never, like rarely. Again, for those survivors that are visual or who really like we see sometimes our really anxious clients like things written out very clearly. Or frankly, we've talked about the fact that they forget a lot when they get anxious. And so having that on paper can be a useful tool, but 99% of the time it is casual conversation, informal conversation about, okay, that sounds, they'll tell us about a situation. That sounds like, how'd you feel in that situation? I felt a little uneasy. So next time, if that happens again, how can you stay a little safer? Something like that.
Thank you. We have some really good questions, and I just want to remind everyone, if we don't get to your questions, Reminder that you can email Switchboard and we can follow up with your answers or some resources. With that, we have a few more minutes. How do you handle safety planning with youth who run away to work and pay for their debt?
Yeah, so again, our job is to be non-judgmental, and our job, the way that we see it, our kind of unofficial mission is to make sure that we are a safe place that they can call, and that we can help if they are in a lot of danger. And so we often have that, we make sure, again, going back to those principles of trauma-informed care, that we are, I mean, we're also mandated reporters, right? So we're not just like, sure, tell me all about your drug use and sex work. We do talk about, and from day one, what we have to report and what we don't have to, what can remain confidential. And then if it is a situation where a report has to be made, we will actually often make that report with the youth, so that we found that to be really trust building, that they know what we're saying, that we've prepared them for that. And again, that we're trying to do that because we have to, and that we want to keep them safe. I'm not saying that they always believe us. I'm not saying that they don't have an anger response, but at least we're being consistent in what we've said. And over time, many of the youth that we're working with, they don't know what protection looks like. They don't know what safety looks like. And so that relationship building and understanding of those things takes a long time. So I guess what I'd say is, to the specific question, is that unless it's a mandated report, we want to make sure that we're creating a space where they can be honest with us. And help them maybe figure out a different way to do something about that debt.
All right, Amy, so this one is, do you have recommendations on trainings or resources for foster parents who may be working with youth who are involved with trafficking?
So yes, I would just point you to the same community resources that I indicated before. We actually do, we're in the process right now, although we train a lot of different foster care agencies, we're in the process right now of actually identifying one of our voluntary agencies in Erie County to specialize in fostering trafficked youth. And so we have that ongoing, case management is too strong of a word, but we can serve as technical assistants for those foster parents when they're encountering something. Again, not seeing a kid running away as a failure, for example. Teaching foster parents about how to safety plan with their own kids, making sure that they know that they will always be welcomed back, or that these are the rules in their house, that type of thing. While also understanding the trauma response that is common with a lot of trafficking survivors.
We'll take this as a last question, since we have our closing coming up. We have been serving victims, and this is a question. We have been serving victims of trafficking for years, and the numbers are increasing. Are there any activities against perpetrators or traffickers?
Are there any activities?
Yeah. Maybe screening tools or activities. This is a question maybe the person who asked it could verify or re-ask it.
Sorry, I just don't understand. Maybe to crack down on traffickers? Is that maybe the question? Is there anything?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So what we'll
Okay.
do is, if this question belongs to one of you, if you can email Switchboard, we can follow up with some resources for you. So we'll end the questions there, and let me close something out. Amy, do you want to take this on, or I think we just wanted to...
I think, we're at the end of our time. And so I just hope, again, I was going to ask everyone to share in the chat, but what I really hope is that you end today thinking, okay, this is one thing I'm going to follow up on after learning today. I think, again, the sign of a good training is having a to-do list afterwards, at least in my book. So I hope that the information you received today was motivating and taking some next steps. And the last thing I want to say is that this is really hard work. And this is a really hard time to be doing really hard work. And so I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for your commitment to serving this population, and hope that today and even in the future, I can be helpful to lighten that load a little bit. So thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Amy. These are the learning objectives from today's training, and we hope you can now achieve them. We'll also share the list of resources that we've been referencing throughout the presentation, along with the link to the recording. Before signing off, I hope you'll take a very short moment to complete our feedback survey. The survey takes less than 1 minute, and it's incredibly helpful to us in improving our training going forward. Rebecca is dropping the link to the survey into the chat right now. And depending on how you join the webinar today, the survey itself may already be open in your web browser. If not, please click on the link and you can access it. And finally, here's Switchboard's contact information. I do hope you'll stay in touch with us and join us for future trainings. Thank you so much again for joining today, and a huge thank you to today's speaker, Amy Fleischauer, and my co-host, Rebecca. Thank you all.